You know that sick feeling? I got off a flight early, went home, and heard laughter upstairs. My fiancé's voice and a male one, answering. My flight from Chicago landed 2 hours early. The plane touched down in silence, just the low hum of tired passengers pulling out phones, waiting for a signal to return them to the world. It was close to midnight, and all I wanted was to get home, surprise Marina, and finally sleep in my own bed after 3 weeks of hotel sheets and business dinners. I didn't text her that I was coming early. I wanted to see her face when she opened the door. That was supposed to be the moment I'd remember, her surprise, the hug, maybe that quiet comfort of home after too long away. The drive back was calm. The neighborhood was dark, except for the faint porch lights cutting through the fog. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something that made me pause. Her car was parked slightly crooked, like she'd come home in a rush. The living room lights were on, even though she usually turned everything off before bed. I thought maybe she'd fallen asleep watching TV. Then I heard it. At first, just a sound through the half-open upstairs window. Laughter. Hers. The way she laughed when she was truly happy. That half-snorting sound she hated but I loved. Then another laugh followed. A man's. Low, easy, familiar in the way someone sounds when they're comfortable where they shouldn't be. My stomach twisted so hard I actually stepped back onto the porch. For a second, I convinced myself it was the TV. Maybe she had a friend over. Maybe her brother stopped by. But then her voice came again, closer this time, playful and teasing. I opened the front door quietly. The air smelled like her perfume mixed with something unfamiliar, cologne, sharper, new. My shoes hit the hardwood softly as I crossed the living room. The sound of footsteps creaked above me. I could tell exactly where they were in our bedroom. My chest tightened. Every step up that staircase felt heavier. At the top, I saw the bedroom door half open. Warm light spilled into the hallway. I pushed it wider and my body froze. There he was, a man I didn't recognize sitting on the edge of the bed, barefoot, wearing my sweatshirt. A guitar rested on his knee, his hand loosely strumming as if he'd been doing this for hours. Marina was beside him, legs crossed, laughing at something he said. When she saw me, she jolted upright like someone had poured ice water down her back. The man turned slowly, his eyes calm, like he didn't even consider this a problem. I felt every thought collide in my head at once, confusion, anger, disbelief. He didn't flinch or apologize. He just looked at me and smiled, casual as hell. Marina stammered something about music practice and a project for her online class. It didn't make sense. She didn't even play guitar. The man said his name was Liam, and he extended a hand like we were at some polite dinner party. I didn't shake it. He stood, taller than me, confident in that way that made it clear he wasn't afraid of confrontation. Marina kept explaining, words tumbling over each other, something about him helping her write songs for a small video project. The way she said it felt rehearsed, as if she'd been preparing for this exact moment. I said nothing. I walked past both of them, picked up my suitcase, and set it against the wall. I could see the bedsheets slightly wrinkled, the faint outline of where two people had been sitting too close for too long. I didn't need more proof. The silence that filled the room told me everything. I turned toward the bathroom and said I was going to shower, pretending to believe her story. She looked confused by how calm I was. Liam smirked again before glancing down at the floor like he was studying me. I closed the door and let the water run for a while, even though I wasn't using it. I just needed time to think. Something in me had shifted. I wasn't going to shout or demand an explanation. I wanted to see what they'd do next. I wanted to let them think I bought it. When I stepped back out, they were whispering in the hallway. Marina said Liam was about to leave. He nodded at me on his way out, the kind of nod that carried too much confidence for someone caught in another man's home. The front door closed quietly behind him. Marina started talking immediately, long explanations about how this isn't what it looks like, and how he just stopped by to play me something. I kept nodding, pretending to listen, while my eyes drifted to her phone lying on the nightstand. When she turned away to grab a blanket, I picked it up and saw the last message thread open. Liam's name was there. The last line said, "He'll be gone for another week. We have time." I locked the screen, set the phone back down, and felt something inside me settle. That numbness, the kind that tells you you've just crossed from confusion into clarity. She noticed me looking at her phone and froze, her mouth parting like she wanted to speak but couldn't find words. I said nothing. I told her I was tired and needed to sleep. She nodded, pretending to be relieved, then climbed into bed facing away from me. I lay there staring at the ceiling, wide awake. Every second replayed in my head, the laughter, the shirt, the smirk. But there was something else that bothered me more. On her desk, next to her laptop, was a stack of printed papers I hadn't noticed before. They were organized too neatly, like she'd been working on them recently. When she finally drifted off, I got up silently and looked closer. The top page had my name typed across it. It was a form, a policy document from my life insurance provider. I felt my pulse kick hard in my neck. I flipped through the next pages. They detailed a coverage adjustment, a significant increase, signed digitally with my name. But I never signed anything. The folder was labeled Insurance Payout Draft. I couldn't breathe for a moment. My hands actually trembled. I stepped back, staring at the papers like they might explain themselves. The date on them was from last week. She'd done this while I was out of town. I sat on the edge of the bed watching her sleep. Every innocent detail, her hair spread across the pillow, the soft rhythm of her breathing, felt like a disguise now. That wasn't the face of someone who panicked over guilt. That was the calm of someone who thought she'd planned everything perfectly. I put the papers back exactly as they were, careful not to make a sound. I lay there until dawn, staring out the window. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The morning sun slipped through the blinds, and the laughter from last night still echoed somewhere in my head. When her alarm went off at 7, she smiled groggily, kissed my cheek, and said she was glad I was home. Her voice was steady. My reply was too. But inside, something had already broken, and something else, much colder, had started taking its place. The next morning, Marina behaved as if nothing had happened. She made coffee, hummed along to the radio, and asked about my trip as if the night before had been a dream I'd invented mid-flight. I watched her move around the kitchen, barefoot, wearing the same sweatshirt that stranger had worn hours earlier. That detail alone made the coffee taste like ash. I kept my tone casual, answering her questions, smiling even. She looked relieved, thinking maybe I'd decided to forgive or forget. When she left for her morning run, I went straight for her laptop. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, messages, photos, maybe the usual signs of an affair. What I found was worse. Her email had an archived folder labeled Documents. Inside, there were several PDF files, insurance updates, medical releases, signature verifications, all with my name on them. The kind of paperwork I'd filled out years ago when we first bought the condo, only these were dated from last month. One file caught my eye. Beneficiary revision, Porter, Evan. I opened it and saw her listed as the sole beneficiary on a policy I didn't remember increasing. The payout was over double the amount I'd originally taken. I remembered setting the policy through my friend, Alan, who worked at an insurance agency downtown. I'd never approved a change. And yet there it was, signed digitally by Evan Porter. The pit in my stomach grew heavier. She'd used my name, my information. My throat went dry as I realized how easily that could be turned against me if something happened. I called Alan, keeping my voice low. He picked up on the second ring, cheerful as always, until he heard the tone in mine. I asked him hypothetically how someone could alter a policy without direct contact. He paused, then said that technically, if a joint account holder had my login credentials and ID info, they could request changes online. When I mentioned the increase amount, he went quiet for a few seconds before saying he'd look into it. That same afternoon, Marina texted me saying she had a surprise planned for the weekend, a reconnection trip. She sent a picture of a cozy cabin by a lake, said it would be good for us. I told her it sounded perfect. My fingers felt like lead as I typed it. That night, while she showered, I scrolled through her phone again. The thread with Liam was still open. Most messages were deleted, but some lingered, careless fragments of their conversations. Words like timing, paperwork, and Sunday night. It wasn't about cheating anymore. This was planning. I downloaded an audio recorder app and synced it to my watch. The next day, while she packed her weekend bag, I slipped a small recorder under the passenger seat of her car. It activated automatically when the engine started. By late afternoon, Alan called back. His voice sounded tighter than usual. He confirmed someone had logged in under my profile 3 weeks ago from a different device. They'd submitted a digital signature for the policy increase. When I asked if the signature matched, he said it did, because it was scanned from a document Marina already had access to. The system accepted it without a secondary check. He said the approval email went to my shared inbox, the one she also used for bills. He'd assumed it was me. I thanked him quietly and hung up. My pulse didn't slow for hours. That evening, Marina came home smiling, carrying a bottle of wine and takeout. She said she wanted us to have an early dinner before leaving in the morning. I noticed how attentive she was, how she kept pouring my glass just a little too full. Her behavior felt almost rehearsed, affectionate in all the wrong ways. After dinner, she went out to grab a few last things. I opened the recording app on my phone, synced to the one in her car. The audio crackled to life with background noise, then her voice, calm, casual. Then another voice, Liam. They were talking in the car. The first thing he said was, "You're sure about Sunday?" She laughed softly and replied, "It's already arranged. He drinks when he's nervous. He'll have enough in him by the time it happens." Liam said something about not making a mess, and she responded, "Don't worry, it'll look peaceful." I sat there, frozen. There was no hesitation in her tone, no guilt, just control. When she came back inside an hour later, she looked radiant, almost glowing. I realized she thought she was already halfway to success. She kissed my cheek, told me how excited she was for tomorrow, and asked if I wanted to pack snacks for the road. I nodded and smiled, heart pounding under a calm expression I didn't recognize as my own. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of her laughing with him, the audio of her voice planning something that felt too specific to ignore, it all blurred into one thought. I couldn't let her know what I'd discovered yet. I spent the next morning playing the part. I loaded our bags, checked the tires, filled the tank, even let her choose the playlist for the drive. She seemed completely at ease. Her hand rested on my arm while she told me how glad she was we were doing this. She talked about starting fresh, about forgiveness, about building back trust. The irony burned. Halfway through the drive, she asked me to pull over so she could grab something from the trunk. When she stepped out, I noticed her phone light up with a new message. The preview line from Liam said, "Everything ready?" I kept my face blank. When she got back in, I asked if she was nervous about the weekend. She said no, smiling too sweetly. We reached the cabin by evening. It was beautiful, quiet, surrounded by pine trees and a lake that shimmered with the last traces of sunlight. She unpacked, humming to herself, acting almost giddy. She said she wanted to make dinner and watch the stars. I agreed but excused myself to grab something from the car. Instead, I stepped behind it, phone in hand, and called Alan again. I asked if he could quietly flag my policy account, freeze all pending changes, and alert the authorities if another claim came through under my name. He didn't ask questions, just said, "Done." When I walked back in, Marina was setting the table, wine already open. She said she'd found a bottle I'd love. Her voice was soft, gentle, the kind that could make anyone lower their guard. But I kept mine up. I poured the wine, pretending to drink. She downed her glass faster than usual, eyes flicking toward the clock on the wall. At 9, she stepped out to make a quick call. Her phone buzzed twice. I turned on my recording app again and left it near the table. Through the cabin's thin walls, I heard fragments, Liam's name, a laugh, and the words "after he drinks." I sat in silence, heart steady, mind sharp. I realized that whatever was supposed to happen that night wouldn't go as planned for her. The game had already shifted. When she returned, she found me smiling. I told her I couldn't wait for tomorrow. She smiled back, not realizing I wasn't talking about the weekend anymore. The cabin was quiet except for the creak of old wood and the rhythmic tapping of branches against the window. A storm was building outside, heavy clouds rolling in over the lake. The air inside smelled of pine, smoke, and wine. Marina had changed into one of my hoodies and sat cross-legged on the couch, scrolling her phone, pretending to be relaxed. I sat opposite her, pretending not to watch every movement she made. The clock struck 10. She kept glancing toward it, each time forcing a smile when she caught me noticing. She asked if I wanted another drink. I said sure, even though my first glass hadn't touched my lips. I'd poured it down the sink when she wasn't looking. She stood, stretched her arms, and walked to the kitchen counter where the bottle waited. I followed her with my eyes, not my body. She poured 2 glasses, her back turned for slightly too long. I saw her tilt the neck of a smaller bottle into one of the glasses before she set it down. Then she turned, holding both in her hands, her face calm and cheerful. She handed me the glass with a smile that looked too careful. I took it, swirling the wine slowly. I noticed the faint shimmer along the rim, almost invisible unless you looked closely. Whatever she'd added, it dissolved fast. I raised the glass halfway, pretending to sip. She did the same. I placed my glass on the table, letting my watch record every sound. I had already synced it to my phone and hidden a second recorder under the table earlier, taped near the center beam. Every word spoken would be saved to a cloud folder. Marina leaned closer, brushing her hand against my arm. Her tone softened, almost pleading. She said she was sorry for the tension lately, that she'd been lost while I was away. I told her we'd figure it out. My voice sounded like someone else's, steady, calm, deliberate. Outside, lightning flashed, lighting up the cabin for a split second. I saw something in her eyes then, calculation, not warmth. She looked toward the door, then back at me. Her phone buzzed. She muted it instantly. A few minutes later, she said she was going to check the back porch because the wind had blown something over. She slipped her phone into her pocket and left. The back door creaked open, then shut again. I stayed still, waiting. From the window, I saw a figure moving through the trees, heading toward the cabin. My chest tightened. It was a man, tall, wearing a dark jacket. He moved like he already knew where everything was. The back door opened quietly. Marina came in first, followed by Liam. He looked around once and smiled when he saw me slouched on the couch. Marina whispered something to him, and they both froze when they realized my eyes were open. Neither spoke. Liam broke the silence first, asking if I'd fallen asleep early. I told him I was just resting. He glanced at the untouched wine glass. His eyes narrowed slightly. He asked if I'd finished it. I said not yet. Marina's expression flickered, a small break in her practiced calm. I stood slowly, letting the tension build. I told them I was surprised to see him again. He said he'd just come by to drop something off. I nodded and asked, "At 11 p.m.? He smiled, but didn't answer. Marina stepped between us, her voice trembling slightly. She said I was misinterpreting everything. But then, from under the table, the faint hum of the recorder clicked as it reached a new file segment, a sound that made Liam's head snap down. He spotted it. He lunged for the table, ripping off the device. I didn't move to stop him. He pressed play, and the last recording echoed through the cabin. Marina's voice from the previous night in the car, laughing. He drinks when he's nervous. He'll have enough in him by the time it happens. The words hit the air like a hammer. Marina froze. Liam's face went pale, the smirk gone. He turned toward her with disbelief, muttering something under his breath. She whispered that it wasn't supposed to go like this. He demanded to know why she'd said his name. Their alliance cracked in real time, right in front of me. I took out my phone and pressed play on another file, the live one recording our current conversation. Their voices came through the speaker, overlapping with reality. Liam realized what it meant. He moved fast, stepping toward me, but I was already backing away toward the door. I told them the file was uploaded to multiple places. If anything happened to me, it would automatically go to the police. I'd written a message attached to it. Marina's face crumpled. She said we could talk, that this was all a misunderstanding that got out of hand. Liam wasn't listening anymore. He was pacing, eyes darting between the window and the door, muttering that I'd ruined everything. The storm outside broke open. Rain hammered the roof. Thunder rolled so loud the windows rattled. I opened the door and stepped out into the wind. They didn't follow. Marina called my name once, voice sharp with panic, but I didn't turn back. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove until I found a patch of signal strong enough to send everything to Alan, along with the local sheriff's office email address he'd given me earlier. just in case. The drive back was a blur of headlights and pounding rain. I kept expecting to see their car's headlights appear behind me, but the road stayed empty. My phone buzzed with Alan's message confirming receipt of the recordings. He said he'd already forwarded them to the authorities. By the time I reached the nearest town, the adrenaline wore off. My hands started shaking uncontrollably. I parked outside a gas station, sat there in the dark, and tried to breathe. Everything I'd known, every memory, every plan, had just turned into evidence in a case I hadn't meant to start. An hour later, 2 sheriff's deputies met me at a diner. They asked me to explain what had happened. I played them the recordings. One of them, a gray-haired man with a tired voice, listened without interrupting. When it ended, he nodded and said, "You did the right thing leaving." They sent a patrol to the cabin. The next morning, they called me. The deputy said they'd found Marina and Liam inside. Both were disoriented. The wine bottle was half empty, the glasses beside them. Apparently, Liam had tried to drive away but lost consciousness near the back porch. Whatever was in the bottle had worked faster than she'd expected, only not on me. They found a syringe in Marina's bag, a vial of sedative mixed with alcohol, and several printed documents matching the insurance forms I'd seen. I gave my full statement. They took copies of everything. When the deputy asked me if I wanted to press charges, I told him I didn't need to. The evidence would do it for me. That evening, I checked the local news site. The headline read, "Local woman and accomplice detained for attempted fraud and conspiracy." The details were brief, but I recognized every word behind the redactions. I booked a room at a roadside motel. The silence of that night felt heavier than any I'd known. Every sound, the hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, reminded me of how close I'd come to being another quiet story in the news. In the morning, I called Alan again. His voice cracked a little when he said he was glad I'd made it out. He told me the company's legal department had flagged Marina's forged documents. One of them was time-stamped during the night she'd been at the cabin. That alone would be enough to confirm intent. Before hanging up, he said something that stuck with me. "You know, most people don't survive something like this because they never see it coming." I looked out the motel window, the rain still falling over the highway, and realized he was right. But what haunted me most wasn't that she'd planned it. It was that she'd laughed while doing it. The same laugh I'd heard upstairs that first night, soft, real, full of life, had been the sound of someone rehearsing my ending. And I hadn't even recognized it. The days after the cabin felt like walking through fog. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation faded, leaving only exhaustion and disbelief. I spent the first 48 hours in a small motel outside town, waiting for updates from the sheriff's department. The phone rang the second morning. Detective Morrison, calm and steady, asked me to come in for a formal statement. At the station, I handed over everything. The recordings, the insurance documents, the photos I'd taken of the paperwork at home, even screenshots of her messages with Liam. Morrison listened carefully, jotting notes while another officer recorded. When I finished, he leaned back and said quietly that the evidence was substantial. They were building a case for attempted insurance fraud, attempted poisoning, and conspiracy to commit harm. Hearing those words out loud made me nauseous. My name was listed in their reports under intended target. That phrase clung to me for weeks after. Marina and Liam were both held overnight. Liam cracked first. He told investigators he thought the plan was just to fake an accident to claim money from a joint policy, that Marina had said I'd be fine, just unconscious. But when pressed, his story fell apart. His fingerprints were on the syringe, his car had traces of the same sedative compound, and the emails between them showed clear coordination. Marina tried a different defense. She claimed the wine was for herself, that she'd planned to knock herself out to scare me into paying attention. It didn't help that the forged insurance documents were in her handwriting. When the lab matched the scanned digital signature to a PDF on her laptop, she stopped talking altogether. For weeks, I tried to stay out of it. But every time the phone rang, my pulse jumped. The prosecutor's office asked if I'd testify if it went to trial. I said yes, though the thought of sitting in a courtroom across from her made my stomach twist. Alan called often during that time, making sure I was okay. He said the insurance company was pressing their own charges for forgery and digital impersonation. I hadn't told him everything at first, but once he read the reports, he realized how close it had been. The fraud department found an access log showing the system login from my IP address while I was physically in another city. The timestamp aligned with one of her late-night Zoom calls. That was enough to clear my name. The media got wind of the story. A small local paper ran a piece about a failed insurance scam, though names were withheld. I didn't correct them. The fewer people who knew, the better. I just wanted out of that town, out of that house, out of every memory that still smelled like her perfume. I sold the condo within a month. Half the proceeds went toward legal fees, but I didn't care. I moved 2 states away to Denver, renting a small apartment downtown near my firm's satellite office. It wasn't much, but it was quiet. That's all I needed. For a while, I kept expecting to see her name pop up somewhere, an email, a message, a headline. But she disappeared completely after the arraignment. Liam pled guilty early, took a deal for 3 years in state prison on conspiracy and evidence tampering. Marina's case dragged on. Her lawyer pushed for leniency, claiming emotional instability and manipulation by Liam. The judge didn't buy it. She was sentenced to a year in county jail and 2 years probation. The courtroom was almost empty that day. I sat near the back, not because I wanted to watch, but because I needed to hear her say something. She didn't. She stood quietly, eyes fixed on the floor while the sentence was read. When it was over, she turned slightly, maybe to see if I was there. Our eyes met for half a second. Hers were empty, not desperate or angry, just blank. The kind of stare from someone who still didn't fully grasp what they'd lost. I left before they took her away. For months afterward, I avoided anything connected to her. I got a new phone number, changed my email, even legally removed her as a secondary on my work benefits. I thought that chapter had closed. Then one morning, a small brown envelope arrived at my office, no return address. Inside was a folded letter written in familiar looping handwriting. She wrote that she wasn't writing for forgiveness. She said she'd been in a dark place, that she'd convinced herself I didn't love her anymore, and that she'd done it all to test whether I cared enough to save her. It sounded like something she'd rehearsed for herself 1,000 times, trying to turn a crime into a cry for help, but one line stopped me cold. She wrote, "You were never supposed to drink it. I knew you'd taste it and stop me. You always noticed things I didn't think you would." I read that line over and over. It made no sense. Was she claiming she'd planned to be caught? Or was it just her way of preserving the illusion of control? I'd never know. At the bottom, she wrote, "I still dream about that night. Sometimes you die, sometimes you leave. Either way, I wake up before you look back." I folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and handed it to the detective who'd handled the case. He nodded, said he'd add it to the file. I never wanted to see it again. Life didn't snap back to normal after that. It changed quietly, almost imperceptibly. I started avoiding small talk, learned to measure people's tone instead of their words. I switched to decaf coffee because the smell of strong wine still made my stomach turn. I went back to work, though for the first month I barely spoke during meetings. Then one evening, months later, Alan called again. He told me the fraud division had wrapped up their investigation and that Marina's forged insurance claim had been permanently flagged in the system, meaning she'd never be able to take out another policy under her name or anyone else's without full verification. He sounded relieved. I thanked him, then sat there staring out the window for a long time after the call ended. I realized that I didn't feel anger anymore. Not even sadness, just distance, the kind that settles like dust when the storm finally ends. A year later, I got another letter. This one from the state clerk's office. It contained her final court notice, probation completed, case closed. There was a single note inside from the facility, saying she'd been released 2 weeks early for good behavior. I didn't respond. I didn't want to know where she went or what she was doing. I just made sure my locks were changed again, and the file with her recordings stayed backed up in 2 separate drives, one with Alan, one with my lawyer. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I still open that audio file. The one from the cabin. I don't listen to the whole thing, just the first 10 seconds. Her laugh. Liam's voice answering. The sound that had once meant comfort now only reminds me how thin the line can be between love and danger. It's strange how easily you can live beside someone, share meals, plans, futures, and never really see what they're capable of. The last thing I did before selling everything tied to that past was delete her contact from my phone. I didn't block her. I erased her completely. Blocking feels like you're still protecting yourself from something. Erasing means it no longer exists. Now, every time I lock my door at night, I think about that first moment. The laughter upstairs, the man in my sweatshirt, the wine glass shining under the kitchen light. And I remind myself that survival isn't about fighting back in the moment. Sometimes it's about walking away before the final act begins. I kept one thing, though, a flash drive labeled simply evidence, not as proof, not for revenge, just as a reminder, because you can rebuild after betrayal, but you should never forget how it sounded when it started.